For nearly 200 years, Chinese immigrants have spread across the world with almost nothing in their pockets, landed in countries where they did not speak the language and were not welcome, and quietly built fortunes that the rest of the world barely noticed. They did not do it through one famous hustle. They did it through dozens of small, brutal, disciplined ones, repeated across generations in country after country. In this video, I am pulling back the curtain on 25 of those hustles. Some of them are still running on the streets of Chinatowns from San Francisco to Sydney. Some of them disappeared 100 years ago, but built the foundations for fortunes you can still see today. All of them tell you something the textbooks never will about how real wealth gets built when you start with absolutely nothing. Stay with me, because the most surprising ones are saved for the back half. Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel digs into how Asian communities built fortunes that the mainstream world never talks about. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Number 1. The hand laundry. In the 1850s, Chinese immigrants arriving in San Francisco found themselves locked out of nearly every industry by law and by mob. So they took the one job nobody else wanted, washing other people's clothes by hand. By the early 1900s, Chinese laundries operated in nearly every American city. The work was punishing, but the costs were almost zero. A single iron, a single tub, family labor, and a long lease on a cheap storefront. Many laundry families saved enough to send children to American universities by the second generation. Number 2. The chop suey restaurant. Chop suey was not really Chinese food. It was a dish made from kitchen scraps that Chinese cooks marketed to white American customers in the early 1900s as exotic and foreign. By the 1920s, chop suey houses were a national craze. The hustle was simple: cheap ingredients, high markups, the appeal of something unfamiliar, and family labor in the kitchen. The restaurant business became one of the dominant Chinese immigrant industries in the West for the next century. Number 3. The grocery store run. From Mississippi Delta towns to Trinidad to South Africa, Chinese immigrants quietly took over small-town grocery retail across the world starting in the 1880s. They served customers nobody else wanted to serve, often black or rural communities that white-owned chains ignored. They extended credit when banks wouldn't. They stayed open longer than anyone else. Generations of those grocer families produced doctors, lawyers, and business owners in the third generation. Number 4. The market garden. In Australia, Canada, and the western United States, Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s rented marginal farmland nobody else would touch, grew vegetables intensively, and sold them in the cities. They turned scrub land into productive market gardens through sheer labor and farming knowledge brought from southern China. By 1900, Chinese growers supplied a huge share of fresh produce to several major western cities. Number 5. The pawn shop. Chinese pawn shops operated across Southeast Asia and inside Chinatowns globally for over a century. They lent against gold, jewelry, watches, and family heirlooms at high interest rates. The shops sat at the center of the community's informal credit system. In colonial Southeast Asia, pawnbroking was one of several licensed concessions that produced wealthy Chinese families, alongside the bigger opium and gambling licenses we will get to later. Number 6. The remittance house. Before Western Union, before banks would handle small overseas transfers, overseas Chinese sent money home through tiny offices called qiaopi or piju. A Chinese laundryman in San Francisco would hand his savings to a remittance agent who recorded it in a handwritten ledger and arranged for the money to arrive in a specific village in Guangdong weeks later. The qiaopi system moved billions in today's dollars over a century. The agents themselves ran on thin margins, but the networks they built became the trust infrastructure that later powered overseas Chinese banking, trading, and shipping fortunes. Number 7. The herb shop. Chinese herbal medicine shops opened in every Chinatown from the 1800s onward. Family-owned, generationally operated, with knowledge passed from father to son or master to apprentice. High margins on dried ingredients. Loyal customers who didn't shop on price. The herb shop is often one of the oldest businesses on any Chinatown street and the family that runs it is often one of the wealthiest in the community. Number 8. The opium farm. This is uncomfortable history, but it built real fortunes. Before opium was criminalized, colonial governments in British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and Siam auctioned opium retail rights to private operators in a system called the opium farm. Chinese merchants dominated these concessions. The Ka family of Penang and Phuket, the Khu Thien Take Syndicate, and the Oi Tiong Ham concern in Java are well-documented examples. These were legal, government-licensed monopolies at the time, and they produced some of the largest 19th century overseas Chinese fortunes. Number 9. The tin and rubber middleman. In British Malaya, Chinese immigrants didn't just work the tin mines and rubber plantations. They financed them, supplied them, transported the output, and exported it. By the early 1900s, Chinese middlemen controlled the supply chains that made colonial Malaya rich, and the families behind that work became some of the wealthiest in Southeast Asia. Number 10. The shophouse stack. From Singapore to Penang to Saigon, Chinese immigrant families bought modest two-story shophouses with a shop on the ground floor and family quarters above. The shop produced income. The upper floors housed the family. As the family prospered, they bought the shophouse next door, then the one after that. Shophouses bought for modest sums in mid-20th century Singapore now trade for many millions in the heritage districts. The compounding came from never selling. Number 11. The gold smithery. Chinese goldsmiths set up in Chinatowns and Asian port cities worldwide, melting and crafting gold jewelry for the community. Gold was the savings vehicle of choice for Chinese families who didn't trust banks. The goldsmith was both jeweler and informal banker, often holding gold in safekeeping for trusted customers. Many goldsmith families now operate as full jewelry brands and bullion dealers. Number 12. The contract labor brokerage. In the 1800s, Chinese labor brokers organized the movement of hundreds of thousands of Chinese workers to mines, plantations, and railroads across the Pacific and the Caribbean. Some of this was outright exploitation, but the brokers themselves often became wealthy intermediaries, taking commissions on every contract, every passage, and every wage paid. The compradors who ran this trade in Hong Kong and the treaty ports accumulated capital that later flowed into shipping, real estate, and finance. Quick pause. If you are learning something from this story, hit subscribe right now. This is the kind of detailed business history that gets buried in academic journals and never makes it to people who could actually use the lessons. More videos like this are coming. Subscribe so you see them. Number 13. The Coastal Shipping Clan. From the 1700s onward, Hokkien, Teochew, and Cantonese trading networks ran junk fleets between southern China, Siam, the Malay archipelago, and Vietnam, carrying rice, salt, sugar, and finished goods long before European shipping companies dominated the region. The Teochew rice and shipping merchants of Bangkok, in particular, built fortunes ferrying Siamese rice to southern China and Chinese manufacturers back. This older junk trade economy is the foundation that later Chinese shipping fortunes, including the post-war Hong Kong shipping dynasties, eventually grew out of. Number 14. The Clan Association Loan. In every overseas Chinese community, clan associations and dialect group associations operated as informal credit unions. A new arrival from a specific village or speaking a specific dialect could borrow money from his association at low or no interest to start a business or buy property. The association was an underground bank. Every successful overseas Chinese business community had one or more. Number 15. The hawker stall to restaurant empire. Across Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia, generations of Chinese families started with a single hawker stall selling noodles, dumplings, or rice dishes, then turned the recipe and the following into a full restaurant. A handful turned that restaurant into chains. Singapore's Liao Fan Hawker Chan, the first hawker stall ever to win a Michelin star, expanded into multiple locations. Hong Kong's Tai Hing started as a small SU Mei shop and grew into a publicly listed restaurant group with hundreds of outlets. The pattern is the same. One recipe, family labor, Decades of consistency, then scale. Number 16. The garment subcontract. From the 1950s through the 1990s, Hong Kong and Taiwanese garment subcontractors took orders from American and European brands, organized production in their own small factories, and skimmed margins between Western brand prices and Chinese labor costs. Li and Fung, which had existed as a Guangzhou export house since 1906, was transformed by Victor and William Fung from the 1970s onward into a global sourcing empire built almost entirely on this model, eventually handling apparel sourcing for huge chunks of the Western retail industry. Number 17. The toy and plastic flower factory. In the 1960s and the 1970s in Hong Kong, ordinary Chinese families turned their apartments into small factories, assembling plastic flowers, cheap toys, and electronic components for export. Whole families worked together, producing pieces by the thousand. Ka-shing, who became one of Asia's wealthiest men, started his company Chung Kong in 1950, making plastic products, and became famous for plastic flowers. The model launched thousands of smaller fortunes too. Number 18. The Chinatown real estate cluster. In Vancouver, Sydney, London, and San Francisco, Chinese immigrants bought property inside Chinatown long before the surrounding neighborhoods became valuable. Decades later, as cities expanded and Chinatown sat on prime central land, those families found themselves sitting on enormous real estate wealth. Many didn't sell. They held, leased, and let the next generation reap the gains. Number 19. The seed and feed trader. Before modern agribusiness existed in Southeast Asia, Chinese immigrant families dominated the seed, feed, and grain trade that fed the region's farms and growing cities. CP Group, today one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in the world, was founded in Bangkok in 1921 as Chia Thai, a small shop importing vegetable seeds from China for Thai farmers. From seeds, the family expanded into animal feed, then poultry, and then a global food empire. Whoever sits at the start of the food chain controls the margins downstream. Number 20. The temple and ceremony specialist. This one sounds unusual, but Chinese family businesses specializing in temple offerings, joss paper, ancestral altar goods, funeral services, and ceremonial supplies have been quietly profitable for centuries. Recession-proof, loyalty-driven, high margin. In Chinatowns globally, the family that runs the joss paper shop or the funeral parlor is often one of the wealthier ones, almost invisible to outsiders. Number 21. The textile import and wholesale. In the 1900s and onward, Chinese families dominated textile import and wholesale in cities from Lagos to Jakarta to Lima. They bought fabric in bulk, often from Chinese or Indian mills, shipped it worldwide, and distributed it through family networks at every level of the local economy. Several modern African and Latin American Chinese business communities trace their original wealth to textile wholesale. Number 22. The initial public offering subscription strategy. In the booming Hong Kong stock market of the 1970s and the 1980s, savvy investors learned that initial public offerings of new companies were frequently underpriced at listing. Family money was deployed to subscribe heavily to new issues and flip them on the first days of trading. The phenomenon of initial public offering underpricing is well documented in finance research globally. Hong Kong of that era was a particularly fertile environment, and a generation of investors used it to compound capital quietly before disclosure and allocation rules tightened. Number 23. The casino and gaming operation. In Macau, the Philippines, and pockets of Southeast Asia, Chinese families ran legal gaming operations, often as licensed monopolies. Stanley Ho's STDM held the Macau gaming monopoly from 1962 until 2002 and built one of Asia's largest fortunes on it. Several other Chinese gaming families followed similar paths in different jurisdictions, accumulating wealth that often pivoted into property and finance later. Number 24. The export logistics consolidation. As China became the world's factory in the 1990s and the 2000s, A generation of Chinese logistics families built fortunes consolidating shipments from thousands of small factories into containerized export flows. They did not manufacture. They did not sell. They organized the movement. The fortune was in the coordination, in being the indispensable node between Chinese factories and Western buyers. Number 25. The diaspora property pool. This one is emerging right now and is one of the quieter wealth-building patterns happening outside community view. Across the Chinese diaspora, family networks pool capital across cities and countries to buy property together. A businessman in Shanghai, a doctor in Vancouver, and an uncle in Singapore might jointly hold property in Australia, the UK, or Canada. The capital moves through trust networks. The legal ownership is split across family members. The rental income is shared informally. It's a private real estate fund without the fund structure, the fees, or the public attention. So there you have it. 25 hustles that built Chinese fortunes across nearly 200 years and across nearly every continent. None of them are flashy. Most of them are still running today in some form, and almost all of them share the same underlying pattern. The Chinese wealth playbook isn't really 25 different things. It's the same handful of principles applied to whatever opportunity was available in whatever country the immigrants happened to land in. Pick an industry nobody respects. Bring family labor. Pool capital through trust. Reinvest everything for decades instead of cashing out. Replicate the model with cousins, nephews, and clan members. Hold the property and the business long enough that compounding does the heavy lifting. That's it. That's the system. And it has produced first-generation millionaires across more countries than almost any other diaspora community in modern history. If even one of these gave you an idea you can use, you've gotten more from this video than from most business books that cost $40. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. The next video on your screen goes deeper into one of these communities and shows you exactly how they did it across one specific industry. Click it, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.